Coincidentally, and because we live in an HBO miniseries, the Senate and the House were both holding hearings on global threats the past couple days, all while Signalgate was unraveling. And two of the people who were in the text message chain on Signalgate, Tulsi Gabbard and Jonathan Ratcliffe, were witnesses at both hearings. Democrats in the Senate grilled Ratcliffe and Gabbard and Kash Patel, who was also at this hearing. Republicans acted like nothing was wrong, that the only threats were coming from funding Ukraine, and the House hearing today was no different. Chairman Crawford started his opening statement by gaslighting everybody into believing that it was just a simple text message chain and that Democrats were blowing it out of proportion.
Being here. First, I want to address an issue that was made public earlier this week regarding a group text message exchange that included several members of President Trump's national security leadership team and a journalist. Yesterday, our colleagues on the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence held their hearing on the annual threat assessment, and unfortunately, instead of exploring the real and existential threats that face our nation, which is the purpose of this hearing, this issue consumed most of their time. While I will address this topic further in my questions, it's my sincere hope that we use this hearing to discuss the many foreign threats facing our nation. I have deep concerns about the state of our national security. The war between Russia and Ukraine has just surpassed 3 years and now includes North Korean troops on the battlefield.
He calls it a text message chain, as if it wasn't Pete Hegseth drunkenly sending out war plans to a journalist and 17 of Trump's officials, who some of them were in Russia and using their personal phones. And he says, I hope we can use this time to focus on foreign threats, because apparently swearing an oath on the Constitution to protect from domestic threats didn't mean very much to them. Before we get into the meat of this hearing, I just want to show you from the GOP's own website on it how seriously they're taking these global threats. This is one of their biggest highlights on the House Select Committee's page. Vice Chairman Trent Kelly got a commitment from FBI Director Patel's commitment to give the committee the complete FBI report on the 2017 congressional baseball shooting, of which Chairman Crawford confirmed was transmitted to the committee at the close of the hearing. I just want to emphasize that, because that is how seriously they are taking global threats. They are focused on something that happened almost a decade ago. And it was a mass shooting and it should be taken seriously. People died. But one of the people that died was the guy that did it. So there's no mystery here. And that is one of their top highlights, that they got a commitment from the FBI that they'll release the full report. Like, cool. What do they think is going to be in that?
After all the gaslighting from the Republican side, the Democrats got their opening statement, and Representative Jim Himes laid out what the domestic threats are right now coming from the administration.
I quote, an enduring potential threat to U.S. power, presence, and global interests. But as far as I can tell, we're now on Team Kremlin. We vote with them and against our allies in the United Nations. We humiliate President Zelensky in the Oval Office. The president's chief Russian negotiator, Steve Witkoff, is repeating Russian talking points and participating on a madcap signal chat about an attack on Yemen while inside Russia. USAID is gone, and with it, all American soft power. If I had time, I would ask the generals at this table about what it means to our national security to give up our soft power. We're no longer helping struggling nations in Africa. China, or worse, terrorists, are filling the vacuum. I wonder how many of those African countries will be named in next year's threat assessment.
There are a lot of very real global threats happening because of Trump and his administration, and Republicans could not be bothered.
Democrats, on the other hand, had lots of questions about Signalgate. Representative Himes was trying to get Tulsi Gabbard to admit that it was classified information because they were literally planning airstrikes over Signal. And she deflected and basically was like, I don't know anything about classification guidelines. That's the Department of Defense's job, and Secretary Hegseth's. Just throwing him under the bus, which I'm fine with that, because screw that guy. But her whole defense is I'm incompetent and I don't understand rules and procedures.
But let me ask you this. Are you familiar with the ODNI's classification guidance?
I'm familiar with it.
I've actually got a copy right here. If I read you a part of that guidance, I wonder if you could tell me what the level of classification indicated is. I'm reading from your classification guidance. And the criteria is information providing indication or advance warning that the U.S. or its allies are preparing an attack. Do you recall what your own guidance would suggest that be classified?
I don't have the specifics in front of me, but it would point to what was shared would fall under the DoD's classification system and the Secretary of Defense's authority.
So let me help you, because there's a very clear answer.
And what is not.
I guess you don't have it, but information providing, this is the ODNI guidance, information providing indication or advance warning that the U.S. or its allies are preparing an attack should be classified as top secret. Do you disagree with that?
I don't disagree with that. I just point out that the DoD classification guidance is separate from the ODNI's classification guidance.
Do you think it would be materially different?
Ultimately, the Secretary of Defense holds the authority to classify or declassify.
Do you think it's likely that DoD guidance is materially different from what I just read?
I haven't reviewed the DoD guidance, so I can't comment.
She's just talking in circles, going between it's not my fault and I haven't reviewed it. So much for intelligence. And don't forget, Signalgate isn't the only thing that this administration has done to put us under threat. Representative Krishnamurthy points out that FBI task forces are being redirected from focusing on domestic terrorists to helping ICE.
Patel, according to the DOJ, in 2022, the FBI led Joint Terrorism Task Force, JTTF, in my hometown of Chicago, valiantly led efforts to prevent a plot to attack Naval Station Great Lakes in Illinois. You don't dispute that, do you, sir?
I'm not familiar with it, but I don't dispute what you're telling me.
Thank you. A memo obtained by ABC 7 News of Chicago said that this task force will now be, quote, actively supporting, close quote, the Department of Homeland Security and its immigration enforcement. You don't dispute that either, do you?
I'm just not familiar with it, sir.
Okay. Sir, I just have to say, the DOJ has now tasked JTTFs to shift some resources to immigration enforcement efforts. And I don't say this lightly, if there's a terrorist attack anywhere in the country, including in Chicago, and it was because the JTTFs in part shifted resources, they'll be held to pay. Thank you, sir.
Gentleman's time is.
And again, Kash Patel, the head of the FBI, has no idea what he's talking about. Like, I'm not familiar with that. And then Republican Representative Scott jumps in with some softball questions for Tulsi Gabbard to undermine the seriousness of the Signal chat. He does it with a real, did I do good, Daddy Trump grin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Gabbard, was the target terrorist named in the text, or was it simply referred to as target terrorist?
The target was not named.
Thank you. Was the location named?
Congressman, no locations were named.
Thank you.
Genuinely, these are such unserious people. Like, they spent years screaming about Hunter Biden's laptop and Hillary Clinton's emails, but this very real scandal, they just like, was any specific location named? We're not bad guys. It's so freaking weird and upsetting. Next up, we've got Colorado Representative Crow, and he talks about how it's insane that none of these people are accepting accountability. And he demands a resignation from Pete Hegseth.
In service to this country, I deployed 3 times to combat in service to this nation. I learned in that time in service that responsibility is core to leadership. You accept responsibility when things go wrong. You admit mistakes. You set the standard from the very top. It is completely outrageous to me that administration officials come before us today with impunity, no acceptance of responsibility, excuse after excuse after excuse, while we send our men and women downrange to do incredibly difficult, incredibly dangerous things on our behalf. And yet, Nobody is willing to come to us and say this was wrong. This was a breach of security and we won't do it again. It is outrageous and it is a leadership failure, and that's why Secretary Hegseth, who undoubtedly transmitted classified, sensitive operational information via this chain, must resign immediately. There can be no fixes, there can be no corrections until there is accountability, and I'm calling on the administration to move forward with accountability. I yield back.
Gentleman yield.
Congresswoman Stacey Plaskett then asks Tulsi Gabbard about U.S. aid and whether anybody in the intelligence community has requested reports on what the cuts actually mean for U.S. aid. She's basically like, nope, nobody's asked us for any reports. We don't know what's happening with U.S. aid.
Thank you. I know that there has been some open source reporting on what the effect of those cuts are. I mean, when we think about several examples, Kenya, our strongest regional ally in the Horn of Africa, and a key partner with us in the fight against terrorist group Al-Shabaab. And, you know, according to the Washington Post, that's not definitive, and we can talk about this in closed session. Some Kenyan journalists are now being trained by Beijing, mirroring the U.S. programs that have been cut by the administration. Director Gabbard, is letting China train Kenyan journalists going to make Kenya more or less receptive to American requests of the Kenyan government, do you believe?
As you said, Congresswoman, our relationship with Kenya has been very long-standing.
So do cuts of ours to train journalists in Kenya make them more or less, and Beijing having that make them more or less receptive?
Clearly there is strategic competition taking place. I'll withhold my personal view to look at an official assessment.
Well, I was asking for your director view, not your personal view. And then additionally, we have ended Voice of America, which provided accurate, unbiased news, in our opinion. Meanwhile, St. Petersburg University has announced that it's opened 11 Russian language centers across Africa that pay special attention to the promotion of traditional Russian spiritual and moral values. Director Gabbard, is Russia a friend or a foe? Are they our friend or our adversary?
They are an adversary.
Thank you. I believe that this reckless cuts make terrorism and our influence in Africa, which is on the front lines of terrorism, a real threat to us, and we need to be careful of it.
And I like this line of questioning because what's happening with USAID is important to remember. Like, these guys aren't just a domestic threat against us, they are a threat against the entire world. And yeah, it is objectively bad that Russian propaganda is being spewed to Africa. And it is also bad that terrorists are replacing U.S. aid workers. Like, that is crazy. Representative Jimmy Gomez then calls out them constantly saying, I don't recall, I don't recall.
Stand by your do not recall yesterday stance when you're asked those questions. You've been in office 43 days. Director Ratcliffe has been in office 62 days. This was considered the first major military operation using lethal force of the Trump administration. Was this the first? This was probably the first time that you've been involved with a discussion like this on a threat. It was not discussing. You were not on a group chat discussing where we're going to go for lunch. You're discussing putting men and women of the armed services in harm's way. That's a major decision. So, and when did that happen? 10 days ago? Okay, I'll answer that. It happened 10 days ago. And here's the point. Like, something of this magnitude, it's something that you would not forget. It's something that most people, if you're taking this job so seriously, that you would not forget. I mean, since I've been on this committee, there's been days that I have woken up in the middle of the night from the things I've learned in SCIF. So deciding to use military force is something hard to imagine. So the do not recall doesn't pass the smell test. It makes it's unbelievable that was the case. So that's what the American people don't understand. And I know a lot of folks in this administration were saying that they're going to take on the establishment and drain the swamp, but you have become that swamp in a matter of days, not weeks or months, days. So one of the things we're going to look into is what actually occurred, because the American people deserve a full accounting.
He's right. It is wild to just be like, I don't remember the specifics of killing a bunch of people. Unless you're a psychopath, that's going to stick with you. He then goes on to ask about Pete Hegseth's extracurricular activities. And John Ratcliffe does not like it.
The main person who was involved in this thread that a lot of people want to talk to is Secretary of Defense Hegseth. And a lot of questions were brought up regarding his drinking habits in his confirmation hearing. To your knowledge, do you know whether Pete Hegseth had been drinking before he leaked classified information?
I don't have any knowledge of Secretary Hegseth's personal habits.
Director Ratcliffe, same question. Yes or no?
No, I'm going to answer that. I think that's an offensive line of questioning. The answer is no. I find it interesting that you want to. I'm going to answer. You asked me a question. You want an answer?
No, listen.
You don't want to focus on the good work that the CIA is doing, that the intelligence community.
Director, I reclaim my time. Director, I reclaim my time. Here, I have huge respect for the CIA, huge respect for our men and women in uniform. But this was a question that's on the top of minds of every American, right? He stood in front of a podium in Europe holding a drink. So, of course, we want to know if his performance is compromised. If people were asking if the General Austin was compromised because of a heart issue,
was his performance compromised because of a successful strike?
Back. Mr. I bring my
you want to know? You want to talk about accepting responsibility? Do you think you should accept responsibility for a successful strike to make Americans safer? You want to focus on?
I reclaim my time. So here's the thing. This is serious. As somebody, we've been briefed in this committee about using Signal. One of the things they basically said, the most secure phone call, the least secure text messaging. And we know that your people are Russians, Chinese are on your phone.
Gentleman's time's expired.
He just calls them out on the basic premise of the whole thing, and I really appreciate his bluntness. Representative Houlihan keeps that energy going after Ratcliffe goes on a very annoying rant about how he's mad that the Democrats aren't, basically that they're not praising him enough for good things the administration has done, and how he thinks it's silly that they're focused on Pete Hegseth's drinking habits. And it's like, yeah, man, because he might be drinking while making very serious decisions that could cost lives. And that him and the rest of the Republicans keep making this claim that because Dems are so focused on the Signal chat, that means they don't care about national security.
Thank you for the time, and I struggle, and if you look at my notes, I've changed my mind about 1 million times what I'd like to talk about. I'd like to first start with Director Ratcliffe. I find it offensive for you to accuse me as a Democrat of not caring about national threats. I very much wanted to talk about those, in fact, had prepared questions in advance of this hearing about those threats, specifically about biosecurity and bioterrorism, but I don't have time to ask those questions because the threat is in the House. The threat is across the dais, and I need to ask these questions. It's my job to ask these questions of you. Because when I served in the military and I served in classified environments, had this happened to me, I would have walked my resignation in immediately. This is not okay. Communicating these sorts of things in Signal is not okay. Targets, times, those kinds of things are absolutely classified, and we all know it. I know it. These people know it. You all know it. And the fact that we're having to have these conversations now means that I can't ask the questions that I need to ask about things like bioterrorism and biosecurity. And so I'd like to put you in check as well, sir, because you can't assume who I am any more than I can assume who you are, sir.
She goes on to ask Tulsi Gabbard if she will commit to investigate any more signal chats, because there's definitely more. She demands Secretary Hegseth's resignation, and she also asks Kash Patel how it's possible that he just found out about this yesterday, which is what he said in the hearing. He was like, I just found out about this morning.
I would argue that Secretary Hegseth, if he had the dignity that he needs to have, should be walking his resignation in, because I believe that his probably is heading toward being relieved of his duty based on what I think are significant and illegal leaks, most likely. I would like it if you would please commit to this organization that you will follow the law, and I would like it if you would also investigate what is likely to be more than just this chat, because if there's one, there's more than one. If there's smoke, there's fire. Would you please obligate yourself and your organization to that investigation?
Yeah, Congresswoman, yes, I will follow the law.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And Director Patel, I learned just recently that you only heard about this yesterday, which blows my mind since I heard about it 2 days ago, and I'm just a low on the dais, junior chipmunk here. Did you really only hear about this yesterday?
The exact timeline I'm not aware of, but yeah, I think it was yesterday or the night before.
And now that another day has passed, do you believe...
Well, actually, it was the night before the hearing.
Now that another day has passed, do you believe that it's now time potentially for the FBI to open an investigation into this?
I'm not going to comment on that.
Because you're the director of the FBI, you don't believe it's appropriate to comment on that?
Because there's a process in place, there's an ongoing litigation, and the National Security Council is reviewing this matter. And I'm not going to discuss any open or closed investigations.
That ongoing investigation, literally, the lawsuit happened today or yesterday afternoon, and the idea that you don't have an opinion on this at this point is frustrating to me.
No, it's not. I'm not going to prejudge any matters, and the men and women of the FBI will call the balls and strikes.
Reclaiming my time,
not
sir.
you.
Sir, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to have...
Gentlewoman's recognized. You have
Thank
4
you.
seconds remaining.
No, I have more than
You have
that.
2 seconds
Mr.
remaining.
Patel would not add...
Gentlewoman's time has expired. Mr. Stubbe.
Thank you, Mr.
Kash Patel does a pretty successful job of filibustering her last couple seconds there, and the chairman just gavels her done. And then Representative Stubbe comes in and does his best to rationalize and normalize with another round of softball questions like the other Republican. Basically, were there any specific names? And Tulsi Gabbard's like, no, it's all unclassified. It's all totally fine.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Gabbard, were there any sources described in the signal chat?
No, Congressman.
Were there any methods described in the signal chat?
No.
Were there any locations?
No.
Therefore, due to the fact that there were no sources, no methods, nor locations described in the signal chat, it does not make the discussion classified. Is that correct?
That is up to the Secretary of Defense determination.
The Democrats are obviously making the assertions that what was in the signal chat was classified and claiming that Secretary Hegseth put this war plan out to the world, which he clearly did not. Were there any names in the signal chat?
No.
Any targets?
No.
Any locations?
No.
Was there a unit name or location of that unit?
There was not.
Were there any routes described in the signal chat?
No.
Wouldn't an operational plan contain that type of information?
Every operational plan I've ever seen has contained that information.
Thank you. Shifting to the real threats to America.
The real threat to America, he goes on to talk about, is the southern border. It is just obscene how they are just doing the bidding of Donald Trump, just gaslighting everybody, acting like it's fine, and Democrats are over there guys, a lot of us have served in the military. We have all been on this freaking committee. You guys know this is classified. You know this is wrong. And they're all just capitulating to Trump about it and acting like it's fine. Representative Quigley then tries to get Tulsi Gabbard to at least admit that this might make our allies hesitant to share information with us.
Director Gabbard, your position was created post 9/11 because of the horrible intel failure that took place there, where we weren't sharing information. It wasn't adequately shared within the community and between our allies. We have to believe that our allies look at this as a colossal mistake and will at least hesitate to a certain extent, wanting to share sensitive information with us that keeps us safe, because they're worried about their sources and methods as well. Wouldn't you be at least somewhat concerned that our allies would look at this and say, that wasn't the perfect way to communicate?
Congressman, thank you for the question. If that information that was put out in the chat by the Secretary of Defense had included specific sources and methods and targets and names, then the answer would be yes, but that was not.
And her reasoning is basically like, if it had been more specific, then maybe yes. But like, you guys had a journalist in the background lurking, and nobody seemed to notice. Absolutely, our allies are going to be less likely to share information with us, especially when the president is attacking our allies constantly. It's like they're all just living in a delusion, and nothing that actually is happening matters to them because it's a cult. He then has this crazy back and forth with the generals that are there, because there are two generals as witnesses too, asking them like if they had this information on a foreign adversary, or if the Houthis got this information, like it would be bad, right? And the generals, like, frustratingly do not really answer the question and are so hung up on the specifics, which is very bureaucratic military of them. But it is also scary that these generals are just like refusing to acknowledge the reality of the situation. So yeah, that was the House hearing today, a whole freaking mess. Our national security and our intelligence leaders are neither intelligent or secure. Their phone numbers and passwords and stuff were leaked today. Mike Waltz, the guy who invited the journalist onto the chat, his Venmo was leaked. And apparently he's friends with a lot of journalists. This is a massive breach in national security, and the Republicans are not taking it seriously. They do not care. And the people in charge don't think they did anything wrong. Thank you for following this hearing with me. Like and subscribe for more political content like this.